Good afternoon. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining the Technology Learning Collaborative webinar. We'll be hearing from our colleagues at the Free Library of Philadelphia about their new device lending program the library is launching, as well as we'll also hear about the work of the digital resource specialists. So my name is Kate Rivera. I'm an independent consultant. I work with TLC as well as a few other nonprofit organizations. And I'm just going to start off by sharing a little bit about TLC with you for those of you who are unfamiliar. So the Technology Learning Collaborative is Philadelphia's first professional development organization. We support digital literacy providers and advocates. Our mission is to drive the digital literacy, access, and inclusion conversation in Philadelphia. We do that by promoting professional collaboration, training and networking among organizations and institutions, and doing webinars like this. I do want to thank Comcast, who's a sponsor of our monthly webinar series. And with that, I will introduce our speakers for today. So we have three colleagues from the Free Library who will be presenting today. Lou Flowers works in the IT department of the Free Library and is part of the team launching the device lending program. Their main area of work is the Free Library's hotspot computer labs. David Cooper Moore is a media education consultant who's been working with the Free Library of Philadelphia and its group of on-site digital resource specialists to identify and implement digital literacy best practices through programming and professional development. And then last but not least is Emilio Alexander, who is a digital resource specialist working out of Pashelville Library in Southwest Philadelphia. He's been with the library for 11 years, and he helps patrons to gain digital literacy. Helping patrons to gain digital literacy is one of his personal motivators, even before digital resource specialist position was created at the library. So with that, I will turn things over to our colleagues from the Free Library.
Great, thank you, Kate. So our presentation today is going to kind of split between two different areas of programming. We're going to talk a little bit about the new ECF device lending program, and we're also going to talk about some of the changes and programming available through the library's other services. So I'm going to share my screen here. We have a little presentation. Right. All right. So we are talking today about digital inclusion at the Free Library. We're going to be talking about different efforts that we've done, especially over the past year and a half since the pandemic, to support digital inclusion in a lot of different forms. We're going to talk about the vision for digital access that's been kind of emerging through this process. I think a lot of organizations have been just trying to figure out how do you support digital access in a time when it can be so difficult for people to access computers in person. We've been asking the same questions. We wanted to start off by framing access. Access includes your ability and opportunity to use digital technology and resources. And there's two different elements of access that we're going to focus on today, and we're going to talk about both sections kind of in order. We talk about the difference in access between what you have and what you can do. In terms of what you have, we're talking about having computers at home, broadband adoption in the home, having the ability, usually at home or not necessarily at a public computing center, to have access to the internet, to computers, to different kinds of devices. And the ECF device lending program is a really big piece of that puzzle for the Free Library right now. The other aspect of access has to do with what you can do once you have that physical access, the actual tools that are necessary. And here we're talking a little bit about the work specifically of the digital resource specialists, which is a job class within the free library system. We're going to talk about some of the support and training that the DRS group does for patrons, and about building what we call a reliable digital identity, which is how you can stay connected to somebody who needs support with their digital access, even when they can't necessarily be in person for very long, or there are constraints on being in person. So I'm going to turn things over to Lou to talk a little bit about the new ECF program.
Great. Thanks, David. So, yep, I'm going to be talking about the device lending program. You can go to the next slide. Yeah. And so we're getting funding from the FCC's Emergency Connectivity Fund, which allocated $7 billion to schools and libraries to help close the increased digital divide caused by remote learning during the pandemic. So the Free Library applied and was approved for over 5,000 Wi-Fi hotspots and over 5,000 tablets. So the device lending program is going to loan Wi-Fi hotspots and LTE tablets, both with their own internet service from T-Mobile. So folks won't necessarily need both, but they can get both. Because if you don't have a computer at home, you're not going to need a hotspot to connect typically. But so the free internet service, because it's coming through the Emergency Connectivity Fund, it is going to end after June 30th, 2022. And after that date, if the program isn't extended, the devices can remain checked out to patrons. And during this period, we're going to be making our best efforts to stay in contact with patrons who've checked out the devices via periodic email surveys. So just to emphasize that this is a program that's looking to serve those who lack access to a sufficient computer or broadband internet. This could mean folks with no internet subscription, unstable access to an internet connection, or unreasonably slow internet, as well as folks without devices or limited devices, like they're in a household that has one computer and multiple people sharing. So that counts as lack of access to devices. And we're just trying to serve a large swath of people who need a way to connect. So this one, if you could click again, I think is how we're trying to get like a low barrier to access. So it should be easy for people to get the devices. And I'll tell you about the eligibility. Next one, folks can check out devices if they are 18 years or older. Be a Philadelphia resident and a free library card holder. So they will have to have a library card and show proof of residency for Philadelphia, which is standard for getting a library card. And they'll have to self-certify a lack of access to adequate internet or devices. And then the FCC also has this emergency broadband benefit. So if folks are receiving that, they would only be eligible to check out a tablet because FCC considers that double dipping as like 2 internet subsidies simultaneously. And so folks will have to certify that they are not receiving the EBB in order to check out a hotspot. So those are pretty much the full eligibility criteria. So hopefully a lot of folks can get connected. And then here is a map of all of our free library locations. We're planning to make devices available at all locations the first week of January. And there's going to be some soft launches at specific locations in December, but as devices are still being shipped, they'll be available at all locations by the first week of January. And you can look to our website for the official launch day. And then just to tell you about how the devices were allocated, the decisions were based on the available data about highest poverty areas, mainly from the 2019 American Communities Survey, the census data, and also use the city's recent Connecting Philadelphia 2021 Household Internet Assessment Survey. You can look at TLC's YouTube page and see last webinar was about that survey, had some great results. And it was really helpful, kind of pointed to areas where folks were least likely to have internet access, being in North Philadelphia and West Philadelphia. And you'll see the darker red represents more devices at those locations, which tend to be in the areas where folks need them most. Let's see. So leadership tried to make sure libraries were allocated sufficient devices for the need and took into consideration staff capacity and resources at those locations. So that kind of explains how they were distributed. And the darkest red on the map pretty much points to our regional locations in Parkway Central, which at the moment have the most staff capacity. Go to the next slide. So now I'll tell you a little bit about the devices. Get the next one. So the tablet is the Alcatel Joy Tab 2. I put the product specs on there. It's an 8-inch Android with unlimited LTE data service, and T-Mobile was able to make some adjustments to the settings to make them more user-friendly for those with low digital skills. Like the display size was increased, the accessibility menu was turned on, and Libby and Zoom were added so that patrons could more easily access library resources. And then when the funding for the internet service ends in June, and if folks still want to keep the device, or it can stay checked out to them, and they can get online using Wi-Fi networks. Next one. The hotspot is the Franklin T9. It's portable. People can connect to multiple devices at once. Chromebooks, laptops, smart TV. You can even connect it to a smartphone if you want to save on data, or if you don't have a data plan on your cell phone, you can connect to all kinds of device in the same room as a user. And it's a way to get Wi-Fi without any installations. And after the funding for internet service ends in June 30th, 2022, folks can, if it's not extended past then, go to T-Mobile and continue paying for service with the device. Next one. T-Mobile has a helpline that is like a 24/7. There's no automated menu, so you can connect with someone pretty much right away, and it's available in multiple languages. So that's great. And the Free Library has our helpline, and that's the number there. So that's one way that folks will immediately be able to get support with these devices. You can go to the next one. So just for our community partners, for promoting this, for telling the folks that you serve how they can get connected to a device, if you think that would be helpful for them, then we will have flyers and social media stuff available. Go to the next slide. Those are some of our flyers. They'll be available in multiple languages. And then once we launch, we'll send out a social media kit. And I think these slides are going to be sent out. And so those watching can get access to the flyers if you want to print them out and give them to your folks. And then to the next one, I guess that's right. So right now, before the program is like fully launched, folks can go to their neighborhood library and sign up to be notified when devices are available at that location. And if they go in, they'll see if it's a soft, if it's soft launching from that location. So, and get a library card, make sure they have, the proof of residency that they need. So folks can start going into libraries to get on that notification list. And I think that's about all I got. I put our email on there, which will come again at the end for any additional questions. So yeah, thanks. I'm going to turn it back to David for more on other programming going on at the library and the work of the DRS.
Right. Oop. Okay, thank you. Am I unmuted? Yes, I'm unmuted. Great. Yeah, so I wanted to talk a little bit about the hybrid engagement strategies that the Free Library has been developing since the beginning of the pandemic. Oops. Can you guys see me at all on there? Okay, cool. So the Free Library has responded in a lot of different ways to the pandemic. Many library locations were closed at the beginning, and then there were reopenings, and the status of those reopenings can depend a little bit on the capacity of the libraries, but generally the libraries are back open. But the way that we are engaging has changed a little bit based on distancing rules and based on other safety concerns. First, I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the differences between hybrid engagement, which is kind of the area that we're in now that the libraries have reopened, versus virtual engagement, which is what we were in at the very beginning of the pandemic, because we've kind of figured out how to navigate both of those environments a little bit. In virtual engagement, you're exclusively online. You're using familiar tools like Zoom, which we're on now, the Google Collaborative tools, et cetera. Whereas in a hybrid engagement, you usually begin, at least in our case with the patrons that we work with in-person contact to develop a bridge to the in-person and virtual offerings that we have available. And so this is a somewhat new model because most of the digital resource specialists that we work with who are in, I think 14 or 15 different library locations at least right now, are used to doing a lot of the work in person. So we've done a lot of different kinds of programming that was online at the very beginning of the pandemic. And we're trying to kind of figure out how to best do these kind of hybrid practices now that folks are coming back. One thing that we know is that patrons with high digital access and digital literacy needs require some recurring in-person contact. Sometimes that is connected to the digital access needs that they have, which is one reason why the ECF lending program is so important. But also folks that are not familiar with certain kinds of computing or aren't using the internet at home regularly need different kinds of supports that can be really difficult to replicate online. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about 3 approaches that we've taken over the past year and a half to try to engage with folks and also talk a little bit about some of the programming and some of the tools that have been developed for that purpose. So first, we need a hybrid engagement strategy, which is connecting patrons in person to virtual and distance support. This can be tricky because sometimes patrons need support that can take a little bit longer than some folks may want to be doing engagement in person. I don't know, Emilio, if you want to talk a little bit about how long it generally can take you, a range of times for folks that are coming in for digital literacy support and what that looks like for you. Like what did it look like before and what does it look like now?
I think, well, for me, it's been more of a loss of people coming in,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
more so than the actual direct time. But it definitely has an effect where, because our computer times are shorter. and things like that. So you really are trying to accomplish sort of the goals that we would have had we were trying to accomplish before in a shorter period of time. I know same issues, same concerns, whether that's getting into, in fact, some new concerns, new things. During the pandemic, they've up, up changed how unemployment is done. When people inevitably forget their passwords and forget what email they used the first time they applied. Now they have to verify themselves. They have to scan their face. There's all this weird stuff going on. You end up like, you still have to give them that extra time. Otherwise, a lot of the things would be impossible.
Yeah.
But definitely, I can see for other people concerned about being too close or whatever, that basically means a lot of that stuff can't get done. It's just a matter of that DRS, that's that person making a decision to extend themselves in that way in order to accomplish that.
Yeah, so we're kind of figuring this out in real time, but it can look different in different libraries, different contexts, and it looks different depending on patron need. So one thing we have tried to do a little bit is do a little bit more virtual programming, which is connecting to patrons to these virtual programs that happen totally outside the library. We have a lot of success stories around that. I know the Languages and Learning Center has done a ton of virtual kind of pivoting that has been really successful for things like book clubs, language classes, and a lot of other things. For some of the programming that folks that have digital literacy needs sort of require, you can see how virtual can be difficult because you don't have what we call step zero, right? If step one is figuring out how to get onto the Zoom and get connected to the class, step zero may be some of those skills that require some in-person review before you can even connect in that way. So another reason why the ECF lending is a really great program is that some of those steps are a little bit easier when you have a device that is kind of sort of developed for that purpose. You have the hotspot, you have the device, you can link them up. But for a lot of folks, still having that one contact in person can make a huge difference to even being able to go virtual at all. And Omelia, you also have a little bit of experience with virtual program options, but I'm going to talk to you a little bit more about in a second. Because I also want to highlight some of the custom, what we call hyper-local programming and content, which is encouraging programming and partnerships that use local relationships to reach patrons. Some of the most successful outreach that we've seen are when local libraries can kind of tap into their existing community networks to host, events, to host, to be the sites for folks like our PA CareerLink partners that will come in and do workforce development training. And so making sure that we're connecting with that local library programming and really understanding what that library is doing on the ground has been really important. We have, this is the list of all of the libraries that have some DRS presence, either full-time or part-time DRS on staff. And so we've been working with as many libraries as possible to try to make sure that we can kind of customize that programming when possible for community engagement. But we've also been looking for tools that also help us offer at all of these locations some baseline of computing services. And so one of those tools that we have, which is a big initiative right now happening through the city, which some of you may have heard about, is the NorthStar digital literacy assessment tools. NorthStar is a big digital literacy curriculum platform that has a lot of different components that are helpful for providing digital literacy support. Right now, the most important thing about it right now is that it's a citywide network that provides computer basics and internet basics along with other programming across city organizations. So this is great because there are a lot of different kinds of computing centers that you might encounter in Philadelphia. The libraries are some of them, but there's also other computing centers, and the NorthStar system, when it is in effect, will essentially allow a learner who is going through the NorthStar trainings to track their progress and continue at different locations. So you don't have to just do it from one location. It's self-paced learning that can be done independently or with an instructor. And so we are experimenting with a lot of different ways that this might look, from small group targeted in-person trainings with some distanced computing to something where you connect someone within maybe 30 minutes and pivot them over to a virtual environment for them to do the learning. And it comes with a lot of curriculum resources and lesson plans for folks that have varying levels of experience. You know, somebody like Emilio has been doing computer basics for many years. Other folks may be new to it, and so there's different levels of support, not only for students, but for instructors. And in our model, what's nice is that NorthStar can support some of the operation and navigation elements that can be really difficult for new PC users or people that are a little more unfamiliar with the internet. That way, on site, we can focus on what we refer to as creating a digital identity, which is essentially just making sure that somebody has a very stable connection to their information through an email address, a password memory system, a username, that understanding of who you are when you're online and how you are connected to lots of different platforms with usually a single email address. So NorthStar can be the starting point for developing that digital identity that is specifically for digital literacy and workforce development. So you can come into a library and get set up with a new email address that is connected only to this purpose, that can then kind of be your entry point into all the different curriculum resources. So we are looking forward to, we just sort of started launching it. I think we have NorthStar currently available in about 10 locations, and we're hoping to get it out to a few more pretty soon. You can go over to the NorthStar website and you can see by putting in your zip code where the closest locations are. So every time a library location is available for NorthStar, it'll show up on the map. So that's a good way to sort of identify which libraries are more likely to have the kind of capacity to support digital literacy engagement. Is you go to the map and you kind of see, well, where's the closest library? You know, are they offering NorthStar there? One thing I like about NorthStar is that it has a lot of interactive elements that allow for that self-paced learning to be a little bit more effective than just watching videos or reading. So this is one of my favorite examples, is the way that they have typing. They take a couple of key keyboarding skills that can be extremely important. Like, so if you want to foster a digital identity for a person that requires them to have a stable email address, password, and understand how it's connected to all these different websites they may use, they're probably going to have to use capital letters and special characters, which is, if anybody has either learned typing late or has worked with somebody who's learning how to type, doing a single capital letter or special character can be extremely difficult for somebody that isn't familiar with a regular keyboard. It's not like with a phone. And so having something that can kind of illustrate it in an interactive way where you can press the buttons and you see it immediately working, it makes a huge difference. I don't know if you can attest to the difficulty of teaching people to type, Emilio, but it can be.
Oh yeah, that's one of the most difficult things, especially when they're doing their passwords and things like that, because some of them know about the caps lock and they prefer to use a cap lock. And I'm like, that is not the preferential way to do that, because you're going to forget that it's on, and then you're going to write this whole thing and it's going to be, you have to keep writing it over. And trying to sort of build that skill is one of the hardest ones, if they don't already have it. And just to sort of coordinate that, the shift key with capital letters, the shift key with making a symbol, and all those things that are, especially because that's one of the biggest problems that any of us come into contact with, is the forgetting of the password. And, you know, being locked out of accounts. That is like, in regards to that time frame you were talking about before, like almost every person who needs my help, at least 15 of those minutes, is getting into their accounts, in part because of things like not knowing how to capitalize their letters, or forgetting that the letter was capital or not capital.
Yeah, when we first started the work, we developed the concept of the first 15. It's like, what can you do in 15 minutes with a patron who has a particular need? And, you know, what you do in the first 15 minutes depends a little bit on the need, but a lot of times the need is connected to email, password, access. And so a 15-minute engagement might just get you sort of to the understanding of what is going to be necessary to unlock an email that's unlocked. And so it's really important to be able to do those things quickly, because once a person has that access and can kind of sign up for something for the first time, you make a connection that actually maybe has some continuity. Maybe you can record that email address so that they know they can come back to this location for some support, but also this is the login. So NorthStar can be kind of the first point of contact for those kinds of things when the traditional form of computer basics classes are going back into effect, but slowly and over time, and with some thoughtfulness about when it's appropriate to do in person and when we can try to incorporate some virtual stuff. So there's a lot of other resources that are available, and I'm going to give you a website in the next slide that will show you where the collection of resources is. Some of these resources have been sort of demonstrated in previous TLC sessions. So we have My Place campuses in 4 library locations, another coordinated effort for the city through the Office of Children and Families. We have in-person and virtual programming events through the Languages and Learning Center, which you should check out for events to see what's available. They've been doing some really good programming. In coordination with the workplace at the Brick at the library, we've been working with PA Career Link, and they've been doing sessions in, I believe, 20 participating library locations. I know somebody from the library can correct me if they're on the chat and I got that slightly wrong, but I believe that's about the number. And of course, the new job training database, which I believe there was a previous training for, or a previous demonstration of, which collects job training opportunities that are sort of consistently updated for folks that are looking to shift careers or looking for training opportunities. And then there's lots of other adult learning and other resources in the various library database, which you can kind of geek out and just check out a whole bunch of. I actually like just kind of going through all the resources, because sometimes you find a database that is just really cool that you haven't really explored. If you want to check some of these out, you can go to freelibrary.org/job seekers. And you'll see the job seeker page, which has a lot of collection of these resources and the different areas that together can provide some of that kind of adult education, workforce development, and other kinds of support and digital literacy support. So I wanted to talk a little bit beyond the specifics of the library programming about what I call these sort of pathways to hybrid engagement that we've been exploring at the library. We've tried a lot of things out this year, and some of them have worked really well. Some of them have been, partial successes. And so I think just thinking a little bit about what we've been able to accomplish and what we've learned is a really important part of thinking about what we want to do going into the future. So I wonder if, Amelia, you could talk a little bit about some of the virtual programming that you've been a part of developing. We didn't do a ton of virtual programming prior to COVID, but afterwards, all DRSs were trained on virtual programming and running Zoom meetings and events. And so we've had some really interesting virtual programming options kind of start to develop as a result of this. So Amelia, could you talk a little bit about your job shopping class?
Sure. Earlier this year, I had, someone invited me to do my, a program. Usually I do resume writing for our partner, the Southwest CDC. And so I said, I'm at home, I have to figure out how to make this program. But I wanted to do something different, because every time I've done the resume writing. So I decided to do job shopping instead, because I've noticed a lot of times when I'm dealing with people that they want a job, but they don't really know how to narrow down the search. And so a lot of times they're not having a lot of success with the job search in and of itself. Or, they're sort of just frequently getting jobs that they don't like in general. And part of that is because they, when I'm there with them, I realize that they don't know how to use any of the filters. They don't know how to do any of that. So I said, well, that might be a good thing to talk to them about. And so I made this program. Unfortunately, that particular event didn't occur. But when we started talking about doing virtual programming for the library, I brought that to David, and I said, oh, well, how about, this is what I have prepared. So, recently I just made this. And so we went through that, how to make it suitable for online, and honestly suitable for regular in-person things as well, because I tend to be a little bit long-winded. So we cut that down, and and we got, you know, this really concise and I thought relatively engaging program about how to use those filters, what kind of places you can go to, and sort of broaden your people's horizons on what they where they can go. Because some people are, you know, some people want to just have a job. Some people just are very interested. So I found like websites that were geared toward like nonprofits and issues, because sometimes that's what people care about, and they don't realize that they have the choice to go looking in a specific place for that. So great program. And we, you know, I'm using things like Eventbrite to sort of try to find viewers, using the free library website to find participants, and and it actually, you know, we had some, you know, we had some engagement. Sometimes it was the people we were actually looking for. Sometimes it was other people looking to do programming. Notably, one time it was very clearly a librarian from like Delaware. And, you know, but they asked good questions, and it helped us know like that, you know, that it wasn't, you know, that when we can get people to be there, that it was engaging, that it was something that was helpful. And then we had the opportunities, which is sort of what I think that Dave is probably going to get to, where once that person had the opportunity to ask other questions, we were able to then help them with other things that they needed, or something that was slightly related but not directly related, because they just wanted help looking for a job. And so we went through that process with them, and we were able to do that through Zoom, when at that time the library wasn't open at all, you know. And so it definitely was a challenging experience in regard to trying to find those folks. But once we got them there, it definitely sort of uh, uh, accomplished the goal that we were hoping to accomplish.
Yeah, I think that you know, thinking of virtual programming as something that happens in a vacuum all by itself, there's a lot of downsides to that when the audience that you're trying to reach may struggle to connect in that way. But as a component of engagement that is a combination of in-person and virtual, you know, these are 30-minute sessions that once you kind of get it down, it takes a little bit of practice like anything. And once you have your solid 30 minutes, you know, you record it, you put it up on YouTube, and now anybody can see it. And come to you for any new programming ideas. So we're seeing it as you know, there's a capacity building element to making sure everybody understands that these modes of reaching people are available, even when as a primary or sole mode, it may not work perfectly. You know, once it becomes just another tool in the toolbox, it's actually a lot of benefits to it. Similarly, distance in-person computing is something that we're always working on. Every library is different down to the layout. And so just making sure that whatever ways are appropriate for people to be able to come into in-person safely, we're always thinking about and trying to kind of innovate around. You know, whether that is having people on Zoom, even if they're in the building, whether that is, you know, reconfiguring spaces, just to make sure that the folks are able to be helped in the way they need to. And again, being able to really focus in a short period of time on getting that person connected to that digital identity, to the email that they can remember, that they can take with them to other programming, is hugely important. Also, the creation, you know, at a time when the libraries were closed more, we did a lot of creation of things like video and other resources, just kind of throwing things at the wall to see what people wanted to do. We have a really engaging DRS at Blackwell Regional Library, who every week puts out an amazing list of very local resources, stuff that he gets probably in the past week, just from people that email him. He said, you know what you should do is you make a YouTube video out of this and send it out to folks, because you send this email out every Friday, but like every time I talk to you, you're making me laugh, and you're, you know, you're really engaging. So he tried it out, and he does a weekly series for Blackwell Regional Library, where he goes through some of those sort of local opportunities. Some of these things come up so quickly that, you know, you really want to get them out to folks in the community that week. And so he's built a little network and a little audience of folks that tune in to see what opportunities are out there. So I think that one's pretty neat. And then we're starting to try to figure out how to offer things like one-on-one virtual appointments. it's something that is difficult to scale when folks are in the libraries and they're working with patrons in person. But we do have some examples of DRSs who have essentially built client bases where folks come into the library, connect with them, and then just set up ongoing appointments in the way that they probably would have prior to COVID. But rather than coming into the library once a week, they see them on Zoom once a week. And so we've done some trainings with Zoom annotation tools and other kinds of ways to engage with people virtually that allow you to have a little bit more of a hands-on experience without actually putting your hands anywhere near the person. So I think that's something that may, really be able to, again, be a tool in the toolbox for this, because once you can really work with people in a more interactive way through a virtual thing, it actually can also help the patron get a little bit more comfort. I know, Amelia, you were talking the other day about how, in a weird way, the virtual environment can sometimes support people's independence because, all you can really do is circle with a little yellow marker, where they're supposed to click, but they can't, make you come over to the computer. So I don't know if you wanted to speak to that. Oh, you're muted.
Oh, absolutely. I was just, one of my biggest concerns as a DRS has been sort of developing that independence, because I've noticed for myself, at least, a lot of times, even though the person might be developing those skills, sometimes I feel like I'm scared that I'm taking away their confidence in those skills because they want me to stand right behind them. They want me to be right there. And you are going sort of through this route of telling them what to do, and to the point where I'm fearful, at least, that they are just following my instructions and they're not actually learning what the concepts behind it or doing, the steps that they need to take. And so, like, I was really excited about when we, we're talking about the annotation tools, about how, number one, I personally, because I don't have a lab at my location, how I could personally do the classes that I sort of feel like I've been missing out on being able to do by sitting at, basically having a Zoom meeting with people in the branch with me. And I also just recently had an experience where someone needed my help. And I was like, well, that's job related. I can do that while I'm at work. And we connected on Zoom, and, and I was helping them figure out how to do, and especially the way that they needed to do it, because they were really inexperienced with the formulas, and they didn't feel confident about the formulas. And so we were going through, like, this is how that works. This is why it works the way it works. And this is all by me going on a Zoom call and being able to annotate, being able to take over their screen when necessary, and just imagining how to do that at the library is something that I had, was just like, when we had that that PD session, I was like, that is a wonderful thing. Even, like, once everything's over, that's going to be great to be able to do that, because you do get the setback. They do have to, you're not right there beside them. And even though in that instance it would be sort of a class, like, the expectation isn't there that, you're here for me right now in this space. And you can't, be distracted by anybody else, or, you have to do this. And so, like, being able to sort of do that without reaching over someone's shoulder, or without, grabbing their mouse for them, those kind of things, like, I think that's going to give them the kind of confidence that maybe they've been missing during, when we're out here trying to help them, because there is a person there that can just tell you what to do, and and you don't actually, and if I can avoid moving that mouse myself, if I can hold out and, just 5 more minutes without doing it, then he'll do it for me, like, and it's like, I think that this is a way that that's one way that we might be able to step away from that particular problem that we have, because I'm sure it's not just my problem.
Yeah. Anybody, Lou and Amelia have both heard this a million times, but anybody who has any negative experiences learning to drive knows that you can ace the written test and fail your practical driving test pretty easily, because there's a big difference between knowing something and really being able to do it. And so getting the hands-on experience is so important, which is why the in-person element of all of this can be really crucial. But it's not the only thing that gets folks to be able to have that kind of, like, practice experience. The last one I just got to show off because I always do. I take no credit for this through our professional development, totally independently put together by Jeanette, one of our DRSs over at Frankfurt, who created at the very beginning of the pandemic when Animal Crossing was like the hugest fad, created a little mini library in Animal Crossing that people who were patrons of the library could go and they could hang out at the virtual library. And you know, at its height in 2020, there were about 12 people, 15 people a week coming, which is the kind of attendance we want to see in a class at a library. So I think leaving the door open to innovative programming that is really generated by interest and by need and is really responsive to how things change has been really an important element of how to make the hybrid engagement work. So the main element of how we were able to pursue some of these pathways was developing the promising practices in a professional learning community over the course of about a year and a half, where we document practices which are both the sort of typical practices, the average practices, what usually happens, and the best practices that we learn from each other, from other contexts. And we don't necessarily rely on a one-size-fits-all model. And we foster distributed expertise where we assume that everybody's kind of bringing a little something to the table. And we end up with really cool ideas that come out of conversations, out of idea sharing. Somebody shares an idea that they think is impossible, and then it turns out it's not impossible. Right now, we're working on some virtual programming options for the device operation element of, connected a little bit to the device lending. Really just how do you get people more comfortable using their phones when it's appropriate, setting the boundaries for when is the phone just not going to cut it. So that might be interesting to pursue a little bit in the coming year. And then collaboratively understanding these problems and developing customized solutions to them, because especially within the library context, every individual library has its own strengths, it has its own challenges, it has its own like flavor, and so figuring out what works for each library has been really important through all of this. Some basic lessons learned, which I'll try to go through pretty quickly, really just to sort of summarize some of the stuff we've been talking about, and then we'll have a little bit of time for questions. So we know that all online engagement, meaning only online engagement, offers a lot of opportunities and challenges. But for space-based organizations, it can be really important. Oh, I have a typo in that. That's too bad. It's important to address the challenges and keep the opportunities. Some of the opportunities that we want to keep, when do virtual meetings actually allow us to meet more frequently and with less disruption? So our professional development meetings went from 3 times over the course of a couple of months when we could coordinate everybody coming to the central library location to a regular monthly event every 3rd Thursday where we learn new skills. And so there's a lot of the elements of everyone kind of transitioning over to this virtual ability, right, at the service level that allows for a slightly more frictionless communication between folks, more planning and development. There's more collaboration possible between, say, 2 DRSs at 2 different branches to offer the same program. Emilio's program was a collaboration between 2 DRSs. Thier's video series began as a collaboration between 2 different DRSs. We've learned that you can't reach people online who lack basic access, and so building digital equity into the online model has been really important. It's one reason why we are really thrilled about the ECF lending as just another example of expanding access options at that level, along with the work the digital navigators have been doing since the pandemic started, and all of the kind of broadband adoption that you guys learned about in a previous session. And we've learned that virtual programming requires a strong community relationship for the online programming and a nuanced understanding of the medium itself. So our, our journey with Zoom offerings went from the idea of replicating the 90-minute computer basics class to, we should make this really short. This should be 30 minutes. You don't get the same kind of engagement. And so the way that we've been able to cater programming is really dependent on what medium we're using, right? When you're doing a YouTube video, you don't engage in the same way that you do in a Zoom call with somebody necessarily. And so really trying to figure out the specific advantages to different media that we're using has been really important. And then bringing the existing community along can be really important, because otherwise you kind of end up with a little mix of the target audience and just random people from the internet, which is always great. But starting with the community is always kind of a way to make sure that you have the audience that you're trying to reach. And when you imagine your audience as partners, you can also make more mistakes and take some bigger risks with your programming with less fear of failure. So rather than planning like a huge virtual event where we want to reach 100 people the first time, we do a couple small ones where it's 5 people and then maybe 10 people and see if it can grow organically. There are other kinds of programming that is much better suited to trying to get as big of an audience as possible. Webinar series, for instance, you really do want to get as many people as possible. But for the kind of programming that we're talking about at the library, it's been really good for us to feel like we can pilot lots of smaller programs at libraries to see which ones are working, what we can use, what we can keep, and what we kind of want to leave behind. And finally, we want to lean into the things that online engagement does well and reflect when it doesn't help achieve the goals that we've set. And so we've just been doing that a lot of reflection this year on, when does online engagement really help us reach the people we're trying to reach? What do we need to do once the reopening begins and continues to meet more people kind of where they're at and get them online, as opposed to assuming that they'll be able to just kind of find us online. So that is it for me. Lou and Emilio, do you have any closing thoughts you have before we open the floor for questions? You can always email us. So for questions about device lending @freelibrary.org is a good email. If you have any questions about the professional development we've done and the digital programming we've done, especially with the amazing work of the digital resource specialists who just consistently over the course of almost 2 years now just brought it. Feel free to email me at mored@freelibrary.org. And Amelia, do you want to give out your email address too? I don't know if you give that one out to folks, or if they can contact me and I'll get you in touch.
Sure, it's just Alexander O@freelibrary.org.
Yeah.
And I put those emails in the chat. If anyone has any questions real quick, feel free to raise your hand or unmute. And then otherwise you can email us. And then I think Kate's gonna put this on the YouTube in a few days for rewatching.
Yeah, and as always, the best thing to do is just get in touch with one of us, because there's a lot going on. We'd love to chat with you.
Can you all share with the group, are there ways for those of us who are work with other organizations, are there ways for us to help promote the device lending program, as well as letting folks know where they can go to talk with the digital resource specialists?
So right now, I guess there will be the flyers available that kind of directs folks to our helpline or a neighborhood library. And then once we know all our locations have devices, I'm going to be sending out like that social media kit. We'll have like a blog post and stuff. So that's when I'll be reaching back out and saying, help us promote this, please help get your folks here. But right now it's a good opportunity for community partners to start sending folks to be on that like early notification list. So yeah, I'd say look for the slides for this presentation to get those flyers, and then look out for some emails.
Yeah, and I think the best proxy for the digital resource specialists right now is to go to NorthStar, the digital literacy assessment, and see which library locations are on the NorthStar site. Those are the places where we've started to implement some of the programming. So for that other form of access, what do you need to do? Those are the locations that you can probably focus on in the short term.
Great, thank you. We just have a couple minutes left. Any other questions for our presenters?
Hi, I'm Toby Gifford. I'm a trustee and a director of the library, and I am so proud of what our digital representatives have done over many years. And that one-on-one help is terrific. We've been doing this for 21 years, and I was unaware of NorthStar. Generations Online also has free apps that guide a person step by step, but it's mostly for seniors. So if anybody has a senior population. But David and Lou and Anthony, thank you so much. I mean, Alexander, because we people who try to get people to go to the library realize the social service good it does. And what you've been doing in the neighborhood library is just terrific. Thank you. Keep it up.
Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you so much to Lou, David, and Emilio for presenting today. You have their contact information in the chat if you have any other questions. I also dropped a link in the chat to a very short feedback survey. We always like to hear from our attendees on how the webinar went, and if you have ideas for future webinars. So please just take a minute or two to complete that survey for us so we can continue to improve and offer webinars that are helpful to you. And the next webinar, I believe we'll be sending out information soon, will be on January 25th at 2 p.m. And we'll be hearing from Philadelphia Works about the recently launched My PHL Career Portal. So we'll be sending information about that soon. If you're not on the TLC email list yet, you can visit our website and sign up. Or if you indicated when you registered for this webinar that you want to join, you'll receive an invitation soon. So thank you everyone for your time today and enjoy the rest of the day.
Thank you.
Have a great day, everyone.